In the hush of night, when the world grows still and the candles burn low, we turn our thoughts to the quiet corners of the past. Dear viewer, this is Go to Sleep Historian, and you are welcome to join us, where old stories are told not in haste, but in gentle measure, made for rest and for dreams. Tonight, we wander through the long hours of history and ask a simple question: what did people do when boredom settled upon them? From the hearth and the tavern, to the marketplace and the silent square, we drift slowly through forgotten moments of stillness, carried by the quiet lives of long ago. If these soft wanderings bring you peace, I invite you to stay with you. Says subscribe, and join our company, where history speaks in whispers and every tale is a lullaby. Now, let us begin, and let the past unfold slowly, as the night carries you gently towards sleep. The evening has drawn itself across the land, slowly and with the patience of many centuries. The light fades in a quiet, gentle manner, as though the sky itself has grown weary from the day's long march. The clouds drift low, brushed with soft color, and the earth settles into silence. In such an hour, the question stirs: when the world was slower, when hours were long, and days were filled with both toil and waiting, what did people do when boredom crept upon them? What gentle acts filled the stillness of lives that knew not the buzzing of machines, nor the constant noise of glowing screens, nor the endless chatter of distant voices carried across wires? The story begins, not with haste, but with a calm and steady step, much as a pilgrim might set forth on a long road, knowing the journey is not a matter of hours, but of days, and perhaps even years. In the days of old, boredom was not so much an enemy as a companion. It arrived in the quiet hours, when the fields were tended and the tools laid down, when the chores were complete and the day's labors done. The medieval villager, seated by the fire, did not name this feeling as we do today. It was simply the weight of time, pressing gently upon the mind. And yet, in that weight, there was room for small acts, simple pastimes, and quiet reflections. Imagine then, a small village of timber and stone, thatched roofs, huddled together against the shifting winds of early autumn. The fields stretch beyond the hedges, golden with the last of the harvest, while the smoke of hearth fires rises into the dimming sky. Within one such house, a family gathers. Their meal has been eaten, bread, broken, and shared, and now the hours before sleep stretch long. The fire burns low, its orange glow flickering against the rough-hewn beams. Here is where boredom lives, not as a sharp ache, but as a soft, lingering presence. And here's where folks sought ways to meet it. They told tales, the kind of stories repeated so often that every listener already knew their shape, yet still listened with the same contentment, as though the telling itself was a comfort. Stories of saints, of brave knights, of travelers who ventured into strange lands, of tricksters who outwitted the proud. These were woven again and again, not because they were new, but because they were familiar. A father might begin, his voice slow and steady, while children sat cross-legged on the floor, their faces lit by firelight. A mother might add a detail, or gently correct the phrasing, for each story was not owned by one, but by all. Even the smallest child, though they knew not the full tale, would recite a line, stumbling but eager, and all would laugh softly at the effort. Thus did the hours of boredom become hours of togetherness, the silence filled not with idleness, but with memory and repetition. Beyond the hearth, in the quiet lanes of the village, others found their own ways. Some sat in doorways, whittling small bits of wood into simple shapes. The sharp knife bit steadily into the grain, and shavings fell to the earth. With each slow movement, time itself seemed to soften. The boredom dissolved into the rhythm of hand and blade. Others took to sewing, mending worn cloth by dim candlelight, not out of urgency, but as a way to rest while still doing something small. For those who had no task at hand, there was always the sky. To sit upon a bench, or lie upon the grass, and watch the clouds wander across the heavens, was itself a pastime. In the deep dark, when stars stretched overhead, villagers often gazed upward, tracing familiar patterns, telling stories of hunters and beasts, of maidens and dragons, drawn across the firmament. What we might call boredom was, for them, an opening, a moment in which to wonder at the vastness above. And yet, this stillness was not confined only to peasants and villagers. Within the high walls of monasteries, the hours stretched even longer. For monks, boredom was an expected visitor, one to be met not with complaint, but with prayer. Picture the long cloisters, stone arches echoing with footsteps, the air cool and heavy with silence. A monk might sit with quill in hand, copying lines of scripture onto parchment. Each letter required attention, each curve and mark drawn with patient care. The mind might wander, the hours might grow heavy, but this too was part of the discipline. When idleness pressed upon them, they walked slowly in the gardens, tracing the same paths again and again, their thoughts repeating prayers like a steady chant. Thus, in monastery or village, in hearth or cloister, the gentle beginning of boredom was never empty. It was filled with these small rituals, these quiet, repeating acts that carried people across the long, silent hours. In truth, boredom in those days was often shared, and in that sharing, it was softened. Consider the village green, where folk gathered on idle afternoons. Some would play at dice, the clatter of bones against wood filling the stillness. Others might watch, not playing themselves, but taking pleasure in the rhythm of chance. Children ran about, their laughter carrying into the air, while elders sat in clusters, their conversation wandering like slow streams. The sun moved overhead, and time drifted without urgency, each moment stretching into the next. Even the noble households, those who dwelt within castles of stone, knew this same quiet presence. Their halls, though filled with tapestries and carved beams, could grow heavy with long hours. Lords and ladies, when duties ceased, turned to music. A harp plucked softly, its notes rising to the vaulted ceiling, became a remedy against silence. The game of chess, slow and deliberate, filled evenings with thought. A single match might last an entire night, each move pondered, each response considered with care. Thus was boredom turned into patience, and patience into pastime. What stands out in all these moments is not the absence of boredom, but the way it was embraced. Where we might seek to banish it swiftly, filling every spare second with noise, they allowed it to linger, to spread its weight like a soft blanket. From that weight came calm, and from calm came reflection, story, and craft. Let us imagine further, then, as though we are there among them. The night deepens, the fire burns low, and the family by the hearth drifts into quiet. The stories fade, the words give way to silence. Yet the silence is not empty, it hums with the memory of voices, with the steady crackle of the embers, with the rhythm of time itself. One by one, they grow heavy-eyed, and the long hours of boredom lead not to unrest, but to rest itself. And so, in this gentle beginning, we see that boredom in the past was not a thing to fear. It was a part of life, as natural as the turning of the seasons, as constant as the stars above. People did not chase it away in haste. They allowed it to come, and in its coming, they found ways to fill it with stories, with games, with quiet work, and with silence itself. The tale drifts onward, slow as the passing of clouds, calm as a stream in summer. The chapter closes not with an end, but with a continuation. For the story of boredom stretches on, through village and cloister, castle and tavern, through centuries of human life. But here, in this first telling, we rest in the quiet hearthside hours, and listen to the soft murmur of voices, long faded, whose lives were filled with the same slow weight of time. For in truth, to be bored is only to be given the gift of stillness, and in stillness, dreams begin. The fire glows gently in its stone cradle, its embers breathing out a soft light that touches the beams and rafters with a warm, unsteady hand. The scent of wood smoke lingers in the air, mingling with the faint aroma of the evening meal, long finished but still remembered. Outside, the village lies wrapped in the embrace of the night. But here, inside these walls of timber and wattle, time seems to pause. The hearth is the heart of the home, and in its light, the long hours of idleness unfold like a tapestry woven slowly by unseen hands. For folk of the medieval world, the hearth was more than fire. It was warmth in the winter, flame for cooking, and light for the darkness. But it was also a companion for the hours when nothing called for work, when the fields lay resting beneath the night, and the body longed not for labor, but for stillness. Around the hearth, boredom found its softest shape, and there it was met with simple remedies that soothed the restless mind. A child sits closest to the flames, legs curled beneath them, eyes wide as they stare into the shifting glow. The crackle of wood is a kind of story in itself, full of whispers and murmurs, the faint pop of sap bursting like distant voices. The child does not speak, but listens, as though the fire is telling secrets. Perhaps the flames remind them of nights with blazing torches, or of dragons curling their fiery breath through mountain caves. The imagination wanders where the world is still. Beside the child, a mother bends over her work. She holds a piece of cloth, needle glinting faintly in the firelight, thread pulled slowly through worn wool. Each stitch is a steady heartbeat, each pull of the thread a mark against time. She is not hurried, for there is nowhere to go. The hours stretch long, yet in her rhythm there is comfort, a way to give her hands something to do while her thoughts drift freely. To mend is to remember each tear, and the cloth recalls the work done in it, the days of toil, the weather endured. Her mind drifts as steadily as the needle, wandering without effort, and boredom becomes a quiet meditation. Across from her sits the father, leaning back on a rough wooden bench, pipe in hand. He smokes not to fill the air, but to fill the hour, the curls of smoke rising lazily into the rafters where shadows gather. His eyes half close as he begins a story, one he has told many times before. It is not new, not surprising, but familiar. The story of a knight who faced a giant, or perhaps the tale of a clever fox who outwitted a farmer. The words spill slowly, as though they were drawn not from memory but from the very air, shaped by his lips into something both ordinary and timeless. The mother listens, not needing to hear but content to let the sound wash over her. The child leans forward, already knowing the ending, yet still caught by the rise and fall of the voice. The story is a rope stretched across the hours, something to hold as they move together into the quiet of night. At times, the tale pauses. Silence fills the space, but it is not an empty silence. It is thick with the presence of fire, the weight of night pressing against the walls. the small sounds of the world continuing unseen. A log shifts with a sigh, sparks leap upward for an instant, and then all is calm again. Silence, in the medieval hearthside, was not to be feared. It was as much a companion as words, and often stronger than any tale. As the story drifts to its end, others may add their voices. The mother recalls a saying from her own childhood, and she recites it slowly, as though tasting each word anew. The child, eager to be part of the circle, tries to repeat a line, their voice stumbling, uncertain, but met with gentle laughter. In this way, stories are not owned by one but by all. They are shared possessions, carried like seeds from one generation to the next, planted in memory and left to grow. Beyond the stories, there are songs. A simple melody, hummed at first, then shaped into words, fills the hearthside hours. It may be a lullaby, known to all in the village, or a hymn that drifts from the church walls into the homes of the faithful. The voices are untrained, uneven, yet together they rise like smoke, blending with the night. The song is not meant to impress, but to soothe, to carry the heart gently into stillness. When voices fall silent again, hands may turn to small tasks. Some whittle bits of wood into spoons, smooth and plain. Others plait rushes into mats or baskets, their fingers moving with the memory of many evenings before. These are not works of urgency but of leisure, tasks done slowly, with no demand for completion. In them, time is given shape, and boredom is softened into patience. For those who had no work of hand or voice, there was the fire itself. Many sat for long hours simply watching it, the flames dancing in endless patterns, never the same twice. The mind wandered in its light, thoughts drifting like the smoke. To gaze into the hearth was to lose oneself in a kind of waking dream, where imagination walked freely and boredom dissolved into wonder. The hearth also held space for quiet talk, not the chatter of the market, nor the sharp words of bargaining, but slow conversation. Neighbors who visited sat together, cups in hand, and spoke of nothing urgent. They told of the weather, of the fields, of the births and marriages that shaped their days. Their words rose and fell like the crackling of the fire, gentle and steady. When no words remained, silence returned, and no one felt the need to fill it. In this way, the hearthside hours taught the art of stillness. To be idle was not a failure but a condition of life, a space given for breath. The fire burned, the hours passed, and in their passing, rest was found. Children dozed against their mothers' laps, fathers grew quiet, mothers let the needles slip from weary fingers, and at last the house drifted toward sleep. But boredom did not vanish, lingered like the embers, glowing quietly beneath the ashes. It was always present, always ready to return the next evening, or the one after. And each time, it was met not with impatience, but with the same gentle rituals. Stories told, songs sung, hands busy with small works, eyes lost in flame. Thus, the hearth was not only the center of the home, but the place where time itself was softened. It turned boredom into memory, idleness into comfort, and silence into peace. The fire carried its light across the faces gathered round, holding them together, binding them to one another in the endless rhythm of the passing days. And so, the hearthside hours stretch on, calm and unbroken, into the night. The family rests in their circle of warmth, the fire flickers and sighs, and the long weight of time cradles them gently, carrying them from wakefulness into dreams. For in those days, when boredom came, it was not fought but welcomed. It was met with the glow of the hearth, the sound of a familiar tale, the rhythm of a song, and the endless dance of fire. And in its presence, life itself was stitched together slowly, patiently, quietly, like the steady work of a hand drawing needle through cloth. The night deepens, the embers fade, and the story, like the fire, draws to its end. But the hearth remains, a memory of warmth, a keeper of hours, a guardian of the stillness that once filled the world. The morning comes quietly, as it so often does in the world of long ago. The mist drifts low over the hedgerows, curling like pale ribbons around the branches of bare trees. The cocks crow, and the sound spreads from cottage to cottage until the whole village knows the day has begun. Yet time is not rushed here. It stretches as though each hour were a field that could be walked across at leisure, with no need for haste. By midday, the sun has lifted high, washing the world in a clear, soft light. The labors of the fields, the carrying of water, the tending of animals, all these fill the morning. But when the day bends toward afternoon, when the air grows warm and the work eases, the people drift toward the center of the village. For every village has its green, that patch of grass and earth that lies open to all. It is not grand, not fenced, not made for pomp or ceremony. It is simply there, a place where paths meet, where travelers pass, where children play, and where idle hours find a home. The green is not a marketplace, though sometimes goods are bartered there. It is not a churchyard, though prayers may spill over into its shade. It is a place in between, a place where life gathers when the duties of the day grow lighter. Here, in the soft air of the afternoon, boredom finds a gentler shape. When there is no work urgent, when there is no pressing task, folk wander to the green and let the idle hours pass together. For though solitude has its peace, shared idleness carries its own comfort. A group of children are first to gather. They chase each other across the grass, their laughter tumbling into the quiet air. A hoop rolls along, pushed by a stick, wobbling but steady enough to spark joy. Some toss stones in simple games, aiming for marks drawn into the earth with a finger. Their play is not complicated, nor filled with toys, yet their imaginations bloom like wildflowers. A stone becomes a soldier, a stick, a sword, the green a castle or a battlefield. In their play, boredom vanishes, and time itself seems to run at their pace. Not far away, older villagers gather in small knots. They lean on their staffs or sit upon the low stones that edge the green. Dice rattle in wooden bowls, their clatter sharp but cheerful. Some wager with coins, small bits of copper that gleam faintly in the light, while others play only for the pleasure of chance. The game is old, older than the village itself, passed down through hands and voices. The outcome matters little. It is the act of casting, of watching, of laughing at the fortune or misfortune of friends, that fills the hours. Nearby, a few young men have set up a game of skittles. Wooden pins stand upright, and a ball, rough-hewn but sturdy, is rolled toward them. The pins topple with a clack, and shouts rise in mock triumph. Each takes a turn, and while some play, others watch, their arms crossed, their smiles quiet but present. The game may last the afternoon, or perhaps only a short while, until talk takes its place. For talk is the truest pastime of the green. Folk gather in slow circles, their voices weaving together like threads in cloth. They speak of crops, of weather, of births and deaths, of marriages planned and rumors half heard. The words drift lazily, with no urgency to be spoken, no need for swift reply. They are not meant to solve, but to pass the time, to fill the air where silence might otherwise grow heavy. An old woman sits with a basket at her feet, her hands busy with wool. She listens more than she speaks, her eyes following the children at play, her fingers moving with the rhythm of many years. A man beside her mends a tool, the rasp of metal against stone, a quiet music that blends with the voices. Even in leisure, small labors accompany the idle hours, not out of need but out of habit. To work gently, while talking or listening, is to make time pass without notice. Travelers sometimes pass across the green. A peddler with trinkets stops to display his wares, spreading them on a cloth bright pins, colored threads, small mirrors that catch the sun. Villagers gather around, curious more than eager, asking questions, turning objects in their hands. The peddler speaks, weaving tales of distant places, of towns beyond the hills, of roads that run farther than the eye can see. Whether true or not, his words bring the wide world into the small circle of the village, and for a while, boredom is transformed into wonder. The green is also a stage for the minstrel, when such a wanderer happens by. A lute strummed gently, a song sung with a voice that carries over the grass, draws folk closer. They stand in clusters, listening to tales of knights and ladies, of distant wars, of miracles and mischief. The children press near wide-eyed, while the elders nod slowly, hearing in the minstrel's song echoes of stories they have long known. The performance may last but a short while, yet its memory lingers, carried back to hearth and cottage when night falls. Even when no song, no tale, no game is at hand, the green is not empty. It is filled with the quiet presence of people simply being together. Some sit in silence, watching clouds drift across the sky. Some lie upon the grass, their hands folded beneath their heads, eyes half closed. Others walk in slow circles, speaking softly or not at all. The hours pass, and boredom is softened, not banished, but shared. Its weight divided among many hearts. As the sun lowers, shadows lengthen across the grass. The children grow tired, their laughter fading into yawns. The dice games end, the skittles are gathered, the talk drifts toward leave-taking. One by one, folk rise and return to their cottages, their homes, calling them back to the warmth of the hearth. The green empties slowly, until only a few linger, sitting quietly, watching the last light slip behind the trees. And in this fading moment, we see the true nature of the village green. It is not merely a place of games or talk, but a space where time itself is eased. Boredom is not an enemy to be fought, but a companion to be shared. The green holds the hours gently, allowing them to pass without demand, without urgency, until the day draws to its end. The night settles, the village grows still, and the green lies silent beneath the stars. Yet it waits, as it always does, for the next day, the next gathering, the next idle hour. For as long as people have lived together, they have needed such places, open spaces, where boredom could be met with laughter, with dice, with song, or with simple silence. Thus, the story of the village green becomes the story of time itself, time that moves slowly, patiently, gently, carrying all who walk its hours into the soft embrace of night. And so, in the hush of the medieval evening, we leave the green to its rest, its grass touched by moonlight, its air filled with the memory of voices that linger like faint echoes. Tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that, it will wait again, ready to cradle the idle hours of all who gather upon it. Far from the chatter of the village green, beyond the hum of taverns and the laughter of children, there are walls of stone that rise solemn and high. They are not built for show, nor for defense, but for silence. Within those walls, time itself moves differently. The bells toll, and with each sound, the day bends to their command. Hours are measured not by whim, but by order, not by labor of the field, but by the rhythm of prayer and the stillness of waiting. This is the monastery, the home of monks who have given their days not to trade or war, but to devotion. And here, in the cloisters and halls, boredom takes on its most quiet and enduring form. The life of a monk is slow. At dawn, the bells ring, and the brothers rise from narrow beds. Their feet shuffle along stone floors, their voices low as they gather for prayer. The chant rises, steady and solemn, filling the dim air with tones that seem to stretch beyond the walls, reaching toward the heavens. When the chant ends, silence folds over them once more, and each man returns to his place, his work, his thoughts. But what is work in such a place? There are no bustling markets, no fields of wheat stretching to the horizon, no smith's hammer clanging upon iron. Instead, the work is quiet, deliberate, patient. Some tend the gardens, their hands in the soil, coaxing herbs and vegetables from the earth. Others sweep the cloisters, their brooms brushing steadily across the flagstones. Some carry water, some mend robes, some keep watch over the ovens, where bread bakes slowly. Yet even these small labors cannot fill every hour. The days are long, and the silence deep. When boredom enters the monastery, it does so softly, like a shadow slipping along the stones. The monks do not fight it. They accept it, as they accept hunger and weariness, as part of the life they have chosen. For them, idleness is not a burden, but a lesson, a chance to turn the restless mind inward. Still, boredom lingers, pressing against the quiet, and the ways in which they meet it shape the rhythm of their days. One of the most familiar tasks is the scribe's work. In a chamber lit by narrow windows, a monk sits at a desk. Before him lies a sheet of parchment, pale and smooth, stretched taut upon the wood. In his hand is a quill, trimmed with care, its point dipped into ink dark as midnight. Slowly, patiently, he writes. Each letter is drawn with precision, each curve deliberate, each line steady. The words are not his own, they belong to Holy Scripture, or to the writings of saints, or to the teachings of long-dead scholars. Yet as he copies them, the hours pass. It is not swift work. A page may take days, a book may take years. The task is monotonous, the same letters repeated again and again. And yet, in that monotony, lies a strange peace. The mind wanders as the hand moves, thoughts drifting like clouds across a summer sky. Some days the scribe feels weariness, his eyes heavy, his hand cramped. The boredom of endless repetition presses hard. But he endures, for in enduring, he believes he draws nearer to the eternal. Elsewhere, another monk walks the cloisters. The long corridor curves around the courtyard, its arches opening onto the garden within. The stones echo with each step, a hollow rhythm that keeps pace with the turning of thought. He carries a rosary, beads slipping one by one through his fingers as he murmurs prayers. Yet often his voice falls silent, the words forgotten, and he simply walks. The garden lies still, the fountain trickles softly, and the hours stretch long. The walk itself becomes the answer to boredom, the steady repetition of step after step. The same path followed endlessly, until the mind finds rest in the sameness. In the scriptorium, the library, the refectory, and the chapel, this pattern repeats. The monks live within silence, and silence deepens every feeling. Hunger feels sharper, prayer feels heavier, and boredom feels vast. When there is nothing to do, no voice to hear, no task to complete, the hours seem to spread like a wide field with no path. Yet the monks learn to walk through that field slowly, patiently. Sometimes, to ease the weight of such hours, the brothers gather in small ways. They may sit together in the garden, their hands busy with weaving baskets, or polishing wood, or grinding herbs for medicine. They do not chatter as villagers do, for their rule keeps words few. Instead, they share their boredom in silence, side by side, their hands moving, their minds drifting. Together, they make idleness into a quiet fellowship. When the bells toll again, the monotony is broken. The monks rise, gather, and chant once more. The sound lifts into the rafters, echoing like the breath of the building itself. For a time, the boredom lifts, carried on the voices, but when the chant fades, silence returns, and the hours stretch on again. In winter, when nights grow long, the quiet of the monastery deepens. The fire burns low, the air turns sharp with frost, and the monks wrap themselves in their cloaks. They sit in dim chambers, their breath clouding faintly in the air, their hands folded upon their knees. Time crawls. Yet in that stillness, they find a kind of meditation, a sense that boredom itself is a doorway to prayer. For the outside world, boredom is often filled with noise, with dice, with song, with chatter and cheer. But within the monastery, boredom is left untouched, allowed to stretch and to weigh upon the heart. The monks endure it, not by chasing it away, but by listening to it. In the endless repetition of chanting, in the long hours of writing, in the ceaseless walking of cloisters, they turn boredom into something sacred. Imagine sitting with them in the dim light. The hours pass slowly, each minute echoing against the stones. At first, the silence feels heavy, the stillness oppressive. But as time wears on, the silence grows softer. The weight of boredom becomes less a burden and more a blanket, wrapping gently around the body and mind. The monotony lulls thought itself into slumber. The hours pass, unnoticed, until the bells toll once more. Thus, the monastery teaches a lesson the world often forgets, that boredom is not only emptiness, but also space. Space for thought, space for prayer, space for dreams. In the monastic quiet, time becomes a slow river, carrying all who dwell within its walls toward a stillness deeper than sleep. When night falls at last, the bells ring their final call. The monks file into their cells, one by one, their footsteps fading into silence. The cloisters lie empty. The garden rests beneath the moon. The scriptorium waits in stillness. The monastery itself seems to slumber, its stones breathing the quiet of centuries. And within its walls, boredom rests as well, not defeated, not banished, but simply accepted, as natural as the rising of the sun or the falling of the night. So ends the day in the monastery, and so continues the lesson of the monastic quiet, that even in idleness, there is a path, and even in boredom, there is peace. The castle hall, the great castle, stands upon a hill, its towers rising against the sky like stone sentinels. By day, banners stir faintly in the breeze, and the drawbridge creaks as carts pass beneath its heavy gate. But when the evening descends, and torches sputter along the walls, the castle hall becomes the heart of its people, the place where nobles, servants, and guests gather within the safety of thick stone. Step inside, and you will find a chamber vast and echoing. The ceiling is lost in shadows, beams of timber crossing overhead like the ribs of some giant beast. Along the walls, tapestries hang woven scenes of hunts, of battles, of saints and kings. They ripple slightly in the drafts that creep in through arretlets. At the far end, upon a raised platform, stands a long table, where the lord and lady of the castle take their seats. Below, rows of smaller tables stretch across the hall, where knights, squires, and retainers settle into their places. The hall is built not only for feasting, but for time itself. In summer and in winter, it gathers people together when the hours grow heavy, when the fields lie beyond reach, when boredom presses in like a slow tide. Within these walls, the company of others fills the emptiness. Yet even so, the castle hall knows long hours of idleness, when stories grow stale, when games repeat themselves, when the music fades into silence. On such nights, a hush spreads over the chamber, broken only by the crackle of fire in the great hearth. The flames climb and flicker, throwing orange light upon the stone and casting long shadows upon the floor. Knights shift in their seats, their armor set aside, their hands idle. Ladies of the court sit in clusters, their needles resting upon their laps. The servants move slowly, with no urgency, for there is little to be done. Time lingers, stretched thin, and boredom hovers among the rafters. What then do the people of the castle do, when the weight of hours presses too heavily? Some turn to games. A pair of knights might sit hunched over a board of carved wood, the pieces set in rows, kings and pawns, hounds and horses, depending upon the game at hand. Their brows furrow, their hands move slowly, their voices low. The match stretches on, neither swift nor fierce, but deliberate. The passing of time made bearable by the clicking of pieces and the quiet thought of strategy. Yet once the game ends, the board is cleared, and boredom returns once more. Others turn to story. A bard may rise, his harp resting upon his knee, his fingers drawing soft notes into the smoky air. He tells of old battles, of knights who sought dragons, of maidens rescued, of kings betrayed. The words drift across the hall, and for a while, the listeners lean forward, their minds wandering into other times and places. But as the tale slows, as the song lengthens, eyes grow heavy, and thoughts drift away. Boredom waits patiently, and when the last chord fades, it settles again into the hall. For the servants, boredom carries a different shape. They wait along the walls, their hands folded, their eyes lowered. Their tasks are few once the meal is done, and so they stand, hour after hour, while laughter ebbs and games end. For them, boredom is endured in stillness, until at last they are dismissed to the kitchens, and the outer chambers where even the dull labor of washing and sweeping feels welcome compared to the long vigil in the hall. Sometimes, the Lord himself seeks relief. He calls for a hunt to be planned, though the hour is late. Or he commands a dance, and the musicians draw bow across string, filling the hall with slow lilting tunes. The nobles rise, their steps measured, their hands lightly touching, their movements as formal as the rules of the court. The dance itself is not swift, not wild, it is deliberate, almost solemn, more ceremony than revel. And yet, in its repetition, in the turning and bowing, there lies a quiet easing of time, a way to soften the edge of weariness. The children of the castle, too, find their own ways. They chase one another through the corners of the hall, their laughter echoing high, until a stern voice calls them back to their places. Then they sit, legs swinging, their eyes fixed upon the fire. Boredom is their constant companion, for their lessons are long, their games few, and the hours of waiting many. Yet in their boredom, they dream of horses to be ridden, of adventures beyond the walls, of places where time does not crawl so slowly. The hall itself seems to breathe with these rhythms. At times it is alive, filled with music and talk. At other times, it lies hushed, the air heavy, the silence vast. The stones do not mind, for they have seen centuries pass, and they know that boredom is as much a part of life as feast and song. As the night deepens, torches burn low, their flames sputtering. The great hearth crackles softly, its warmth spreading through the chamber. The lord and lady withdraw to their private rooms. The nobles follow, the servants gather what remains. Slowly, the hall empties, footsteps fading into the stairwells and corridors. At last, the vast chamber lies still. The tapestries hang silent, the long tables stand bare, the fire sinks to embers. Boredom itself seems to rest, curling up in the shadows, waiting for the next evening, the next gathering, the next long passing of hours. Yet within this stillness lies the very heart of castle life. For boredom teaches patience, and patience binds the days together. The hall is not only for feasting, not only for merriment, but for enduring the long hours of quiet, for sharing idleness with others, for letting time itself slow until it feels as ancient as the stones. And so the castle hall, vast and echoing, becomes a chamber not only of lords and ladies, but of boredom itself, soft, steady, and unending, like the slow rhythm of a lullaby carried upon the fire's last sigh. The Pilgrim's Road. There was once a time when the roads of the world were alive with footsteps. Not the hurried steps of merchants rushing to trade, nor the thunder of armies marching to battle, but the slow and steady tread of pilgrims, men and women, young and old, rich and poor alike, set out from their homes to walk across fields and valleys, forests and hills, toward shrines and holy places. Their journeys stretched for days, for months, sometimes for years. And in those long miles, boredom walked beside them, as faithful as a shadow. The Pilgrim's Road begins at dawn, when the air is still cool and the horizon glimmers faintly with the promise of day. The pilgrim ties a cloak about the shoulders, takes up a walking staff, and steps onto the path. The sound of boots upon the dirt is steady and simple. Ahead lies the long road, winding into the distance, lined by hedges, stones, and the fields of farmers just beginning their work. Behind lies the familiar village, growing smaller with each step. At first, the journey feels alive with purpose. The heart beats with hope, the mind with prayer, the soul with the thought of reaching sacred ground. Each step seems to carry the pilgrim closer to something vast, something eternal. Yet as the hours stretch on, as the road unwinds, mile by mile, that first rush of purpose softens. The fields begin to blur, the miles begin to weigh, and boredom settles gently upon the shoulders. For on the Pilgrim's Road, there is little to fill the time. The landscape changes slowly. A hill rises, a stream bends, a forest spreads its shade. But between these moments lie long stretches of sameness. The body grows tired, but the mind grows restless. With no feast, no song, no work to occupy the hands, the pilgrim must sit with the emptiness of the hours. The staff taps, the feet shuffle, the path continues. Some pilgrims ease the monotony with prayer. Their lips move silently, words of devotion repeated again and again, until the chant becomes as steady as the footstep. Ave, they murmur, avenue, with each breath, until the prayer becomes the rhythm of the road itself. The words carry them forward, filling the silence, making boredom into something softer, almost holy. Others turn to song. A pilgrim may hum beneath the breath, a tune learned in childhood, or a ballad of saints, or a simple melody that follows the beat of walking. The sound drifts into the air, caught by the breeze, carried across the fields. It does not matter if no one listens. The song itself is enough to lift the long hours, to make the road feel less empty. When pilgrims walk together, boredom is shared in conversation. They speak of their homes, of their families, of small tales from villages far away. They tell of the shrine they seek, of the miracles whispered, of the relics that rest there. The words help the miles pass, though soon they, too, grow quiet, and only the steady sound of footsteps remains. There are days when the road seems endless. Clouds gather, the air grows damp, and the path stretches across open land with no village, no inn, no chapel in sight. On such days, the pilgrims simply endure. They lean on their staffs, they bow their heads against the wind, they let the hours pass as slowly as the crawling of a snail. Boredom deepens into weariness, and weariness becomes a kind of stillness. Yet even boredom has its gifts. For in those long, empty hours, the mind wanders into dreams. The pilgrim imagines the shrine ahead, the glow of candles, the hush of prayer, the relic resting in gold. They picture saints walking beside them, unseen but present, their voices silent but comforting. Some even dream of visions, born from the endless sameness of the road, as if boredom itself were a doorway into the world of the spirit. At night, the pilgrims gather in inns or by campfires. They sit upon the ground, cloaks wrapped tightly, their meals simple bread, cheese, a bit of broth. The fire crackles, sparks rising into the dark. They speak little, for their bodies are weary, and their voices soft. Soon they lie down upon straw or earth, their heads upon packs, the stars glittering above. The boredom of the day becomes the stillness of sleep, the monotony melting into dreams. and then dawn comes again, and the road stretches once more. In time, the road itself becomes the teacher. It shows that boredom cannot always be escaped, only endured. It shows that monotony can be softened with prayer, or with song, or with the quiet fellowship of travelers. It shows that even when the hours are heavy and the miles unending, each step carries one forward, and each moment brings the pilgrim closer to their destination. Some pilgrims never reach their shrine. Illness strikes, or weariness overwhelms, or the road itself proves too long. Yet even for them, the journey holds meaning. The boredom they endured, the patience they learned, the quiet they carried mile after mile, these became their offering, their devotion. And for those who reach the holy place, boredom fades at last. The long road ends, the shrine rises before them, candles glowing, incense curling in the air. Kneeling upon the stone, they remember the miles, the prayers, the songs, the endless hours of walking, and they see that boredom itself was part of the pilgrimage, as sacred as the shrine, as necessary as the destination. So the pilgrim's road stretches on, across hills and valleys, forests and plains. It is a path not only of feet, but of patience, of weariness, of boredom endured. And in its slow, unhurried rhythm, it carries every traveler toward stillness, toward quiet, toward rest. The village green in the heart of the countryside, where fields spread wide and cottages stand with thatched roofs, bowed by years of sun and rain, there lies the village green. It is no more than a stretch of grass, a broad patch of earth kept open among the clustered homes. Yet it is here that the people of the village gather, not only for fairs and festivals, but for the long, ordinary hours when the weight of boredom presses upon their lives. The village green lies quiet at dawn. Dew clings to the blades of grass, shimmering in the early light. The air is fresh, carrying the faint sense of hearth smoke and tilled soil. A lone cow grazes near the edge, its slow chewing the only sound. Soon, though, footsteps stir the silence. A child runs barefoot into the open, chasing after nothing at all, simply reveling in the freedom of space. Another joins, and then another, until laughter ripples faintly through the stillness. For the children, boredom on the green turns swiftly into play. They toss pebbles, weave daisy chains, chase one another in circles until they fall breathless upon the grass. Their games are simple, drawn from imagination rather than from toys, but they are endless in variety. A stick becomes a sword, a stone, a treasure, a line in the dirt, a battlefield. Yet even these games fade with time, and then the children lie staring up at the sky, tracing the shapes of clouds as they drift slowly overhead. The elders of the village also find themselves upon the green. They come with no haste, leaning upon sticks, their steps measured, their cloaks wrapped close. They sit upon benches or stones, their eyes watching the children, their ears listening to the faint hum of life around them. For them, the green is a place where boredom is softened by company. The long hours of waiting for harvest, for news, for the slow turning of seasons, pass more easily when shared in quiet presence. As the day unfolds, more villagers gather. The weaver, his work finished for the morning, steps outside for air. The smith's apprentice, weary of hammering iron, takes a seat upon the grass. A washerwoman, her hands raw from the stream, rests her basket at her side and lowers herself with a sigh. They do not come to find great entertainment, nor to banish boredom completely. They come to ease it, to pass it along together, to let the hours slip by more gently in one another's company. Sometimes, games spring up among the grown. A pair of men may toss a leather ball between them, watched by others who cheer with quiet amusement. Young lads wrestle in the grass, their laughter echoing across the green. A girl brings a lute, plucking a tune that drifts soft and sweet through the air. Soon, voices join in, humming, singing, the sound rising and falling until it fades again into silence. Other times, the villagers tell tales. An old woman, her face lined with age, begins to speak of days long past, of winters, harsher than any remembered, of wolves that prowled the edge of the woods, of lords and soldiers who came and went. Her voice is steady, her words slow, and the listeners lean closer, letting the tale fill the empty hours. Yet even tales grow weary, and when her story ends, the silence returns, deep and gentle as before. The green itself holds its own quiet life. Birds hop across the grass, pecking at crumbs. Bees drift lazily among the flowers at its edge. The wind moves softly through the trees, bending their branches in a slow dance. To sit upon the green is to notice these things, to watch the world in its small details. Boredom sharpens the eye, and what once seemed empty becomes filled with little wonders. When festivals come, the green bursts into color, and noise dancers whirling, musicians playing, stalls set with goods. But those days are rare. More often, the green is a place of long idleness, where time stretches unhurried and uneventful. The villagers accept this, for their lives are bound by seasons, not by constant novelty. Boredom is not an enemy but a companion, woven into the very rhythm of the year. As evening nears, the green grows quieter. The children are called home, their laughter fading into the lanes. The elders rise slowly, their cloaks gathered about them, their voices murmuring farewells. The last few linger, watching as the sun dips low, painting the cottages in gold. Then, one by one, they, too, depart. At last, the green lies empty once more. The grass whispers in the breeze, the shadows lengthen, the air cools. Boredom rests again upon the open space, soft and patient, waiting for the next day. The next gathering, the next long passing of time. The village green, humble and quiet, teaches its own lesson. It shows that idleness, when shared, becomes gentler. That boredom, when carried together, grows lighter. That in the slow hours, in the uneventful moments, there is still life, still peace, still the steady turning of the world beneath the sky. And so the green remains, a patch of earth unchanged by years, a place where villagers have gathered for generations to pass their hours in company, in games, in tales, or in silence. A place where boredom does not vanish but settles, calmly, like dew upon the grass, waiting for morning once again. The winter hearth, when the air outside grew sharp with frost, when the fields lay silent beneath a shroud of snow, and when the nights stretched long as though they would never end, people of the Middle Ages turned inward toward the hearth. The hearth was not only the place of warmth, but also the heart of every home, the quiet center where life gathered when boredom pressed too heavily upon the cold, dark hours. In a peasant's cottage, the hearth was small and simple. Stones marked its edges, blackened with years of smoke, and the chimney above did little to carry the fumes away. The air was heavy, but it was warm, and warmth mattered more than clear breath. Around it, family members gathered as evening fell. Children drew close, their cheeks flushed from the cold, their small hands stretching toward the flames. Parents sat upon low stools, their shoulders hunched, their eyes tired from labor in the fields. There was little to do when snow covered the land. The cattle were sheltered in barns, the tools of farming were stored away, and the ground was too hard to till. Boredom crept into these idle months, but the hearth offered a remedy. While the fire cracked and spat, people busied their hands with tasks suited to the indoors. Women spun wool, their distaffs resting against their shoulders, their fingers pulling fibers into thread with patient repetition. Men mended harnesses or sharpened knives, each stroke of the whetstone steady, unhurried. Children sometimes whittled sticks into toys, or simply sat, watching sparks rise like tiny stars and vanish into the dark of the chimney. Silence often filled the room, broken only by the fire's murmur. It was not an uneasy silence, but a natural one, born of fatigue and the slow rhythm of winter nights. Yet from time to time, voices rose. A father might tell a tale of his own youth, of storms endured or hunts long past. A grandmother, her hands steady upon the spindle, might speak of saints and miracles, weaving holy lessons into the idle hours. The children leaned close, their eyes round, their boredom forgotten, as their imaginations carried them beyond the walls of the cottage. Food, too, played its part in easing the long nights. Porridge simmered in a pot hung above the fire, filling the air with the scent of oats or barley. Sometimes bits of dried fruit or honey were stirred in, small treasures saved for such times. On better evenings, a rabbit or a chicken might roast, the smell rich and comforting. Eating together, slowly, steadily, filled not only the belly but also the hours. Even the act of watching food cook, the pot bubbling, the meat hissing, offered its own quiet entertainment. Outside, the world lay still. Snow blanketed the ground, muffling every sound. The wind rattled shutters, the branches creaked under frost, and the moon hung pale over frozen fields. Inside, the hearth became the counterbalance, a place of warmth against cold, light against darkness, togetherness against solitude. In noble halls, the hearth grew larger, grander. Great fires blazed in stone fireplaces tall as a man, logs stacked thick and high. Servants tended the flames, feeding them through the night, so the chill would never creep too close to the lords and ladies seated nearby. Around these hearths, boredom took a different shape. Nobles, spared from labor, often found themselves weighed down by time. The fire, bright and roaring, became a stage for diversion. Minstrels sang ballads, their voices rising and falling in rhythm with the crackle of flame. Courtiers played chess or backgammon upon carved boards, the pieces glimmering in firelight as they moved slowly, deliberately. Ladies embroidered by the glow, their needles flashing, their silks bright against the shadows. Conversation flowed more easily in the warmth, small talk of hunts, of feasts, of news from distant lands. Yet even here, long hours stretched, and idleness often pressed upon the noble heart. The hearth softened it, gave it shape, made it bearable. In monasteries, the winter hearth was quieter still. Fires burned in refectories and kitchens, never for comfort alone, but always with purpose. Monks warmed their hands briefly, then returned to their studies, their copying of texts, their chanting of psalms. Yet even here the hearth was a center, a place where brethren gathered, when frost bit too deeply, sharing not stories of hunts or legends, but readings from holy texts, words that warmed the spirit as surely as the flames warmed the flesh. What united all these hearths peasant noble monk was their role as anchor. In a season when boredom threatened to weigh heavily, when days were short and nights long, the hearth provided more than warmth. It offered a rhythm. Fire needed tending, wood needed fetching, embers needed stirring. The simple act of keeping flame alive filled the idle hours with purpose. And so, the winter hearth became not only a cure for boredom, but also a teacher. It taught patience, for flames rose slowly and died quickly if neglected. It taught attention, for sparks could leap and kindle disaster if left unwatched. It taught presence, for around its circle people gathered, spoke, listened, and dreamed. Many evenings ended with nothing but the fire. Work ceased, voices fell silent, food was finished, and all that remained was the steady glow of embers. People stared into it, their thoughts drifting like smoke. Boredom, once sharp, melted into something else, into reflection, into quiet, into the slow drawing of sleep. The hearth lulled them, as surely as a lullaby, into rest. And so, in the depths of winter, when boredom pressed hardest, people of the Middle Ages found their solace in the hearth. It was the heart of the home, the guardian of warmth, the companion of idleness. Around it, they learned not to fear boredom, but to share it, to soften it, and to let it carry them, gently, toward sleep. The pilgrims rest along the winding roads of the Middle Ages, where dust rose in summer, and mud clung in spring, where autumn leaves whispered underfoot, and winter ice cracked upon the path. There walked the pilgrim. Some went alone, others in small bands, but all carried the same burden, the long miles of travel, and the longer hours of waiting. For a pilgrimage was not only a journey of faith, but also a slow wandering through time itself. And with time came boredom, stretching wide across the days. The pilgrim's rest was unlike the noble's garden, unlike the peasant's hearth. It was a pause taken upon the road, a stopping in strange places, among strangers. When the feet grew sore, when the pack felt heavy, when the road ahead seemed endless, pilgrims found refuge in wayside inns, in monasteries, or beneath the open sky. And each of these resting places gave shape to the idle hours. At an inn, the pilgrim found noise enough to fill the silence. The hearth burned high, casting shadows upon rough-hewn beams. Merchants spoke of their wares, travelers of their lands, soldiers of their battles. The pilgrim listened, half dreaming, not caring whether every word was true. Boredom was softened by the mingling of voices, by the creak of benches, by the clatter of cups. Meals were shared, bread coarse and brown, cheese hard from the road, a pot of stew whose smell filled the room. Eating slowly, listening idly, the pilgrim's long hours passed. Yet not all rests were so full. Sometimes the inn was crowded, and the pilgrim slept in a corner, his bundle his pillow, listening to snores, to coughs, to the shifting of sleepers. Sometimes the road held no inn at all, and the pilgrim slept beneath hedgerows, or in a barn granted by a kindly farmer. There, the rest was quieter still. The stars wheeled above, cold and distant. The earth was hard, yet the body, weary from walking, found sleep with little coaxing, and boredom, in such moments, gave way to dream. When fortune guided them to monasteries, pilgrims found another kind of rest. Monks opened their doors, offering bread and broth, a place by the fire, a corner of straw upon which to lie. The hours there were filled with prayer, with chant, with silence deeper than any road. Pilgrims sat in cloisters, listening to the echo of voices rising in Latin song, not always understood, but always felt. Time in such places did not hurry. It drifted, as if each hour were stretched and made soft by devotion. The pilgrim, weary of miles, found boredom transformed into reverence. Yet not every hour was prayer or noise. Many were simply long and still. A pilgrim might sit by a roadside, staff resting against his shoulder, watching clouds drift. He might trace shapes in the dust with his toe, or count the pebbles at his feet, or hum a tune to pass the minutes. Sometimes he spoke with companions, sharing small stories, riddles, or songs. Other times, words failed, and silence grew heavy, shared only with the sound of birds or wind. In these idle hours, the pilgrim learned patience more than faith, for the road was long, and boredom was as constant a companion as prayer. Children, too, walked these roads with their parents. Their voices filled what silence might otherwise have lingered. They asked endless questions: why the shrine stood by the roadside, why the saint had walked this way, why the clouds took such shapes. Parents answered, sometimes gently, sometimes weary, but always grateful for the way a child's wonder filled the long hours. Games were made from small things, counting the steps between mile markers, tossing pebbles ahead and aiming for them, singing snatches of simple rhymes. In such ways, boredom was softened, turned almost into play. The seasons shaped the pilgrim's rest. In spring, flowers by the road eased the eye, their fragrance carrying into camp at night. In summer, shade was sought beneath great oaks, where pilgrims dozed while cicadas sang. In autumn, the smell of leaves, the golden light of dusk, turned even idleness into beauty. But in winter, rest was harder. Frost stiffened the ground, winds cut through cloaks, and boredom was sharpened by cold. Then the hearth of an inn, the fire of a monastery, the kindness of strangers, these became not just comforts but necessities, as precious as food or drink. And so, the pilgrim's rest was not a cure for boredom, but a weaving of it into the fabric of the journey. Hours spent sitting upon a bench, staring at smoke rising, hours lying upon straw, listening to the creak of rafters. Hours walking, waiting only for the next mile to pass. These hours were not wasted, but transformed, for in them lay the heart of pilgrimage, not only the reaching of holy places, but the slow shaping of the self. When pilgrims spoke of their journeys later, they told of shrines and relics, of miracles and sights. But hidden beneath, in every tale, was also the memory of idleness, of waiting, of resting, of the gentle passing of time. These memories, though seldom named, were the true companions of the road. Thus the pilgrim's rest, whether by inn or monastery, by roadside or hedge, was always more than a pause in travel. It was a teaching that boredom itself can be borne, that hours can stretch long without breaking, that patience is as holy as prayer. And in learning this, pilgrims found a strange peace. The road wound on, the miles stretched far, but each rest, each pause, each idle hour became part of the journey, part of the offering, part of the soul's slow walk toward its end. And so, the pilgrim's rest was never wasted. It was as much the pilgrimage as the walking itself. Quiet, lingering lesson, carried gently in memory, carried gently in the heart. The minstrels pause along the cobbled streets of towns. Within the high walls of castles, and upon the greens of humble villages, there moved a minstrel. His life was travel, his trade was song, and his wealth was the coin of listening hearts. Yet even the minstrel, with lute in hand and voice upon the air, knew the burden of long idle hours. For between the songs there was always silence, and in that silence the minstrel paused. He paused in taverns, when the crowd grew weary of music, when laughter and drink drew ears away from melody. He paused in noble halls, waiting for the Lord to give nod before the next tune began. He paused in market squares, when children grew restless and dogs barked too loudly to be heard. And in these pauses, boredom crept quietly upon him, as it crept upon all. The minstrel's pause, however, was never empty. It was a time of watching, of waiting, of weaving. While his fingers rested upon the strings, his eyes wandered. He saw the faces of peasants, weary yet eager for a tale. He saw the knights, leaning upon their elbows, half listening but softened by the cadence of rhyme. He saw the ladies, their needles pausing, their eyes half hidden behind embroidery hoops as they listened. Each face was a page upon which he read, and in reading, his pause became part of his song. Between performances, when miles of road stretched lonely ahead, the minstrel carried his boredom as he carried his instrument. He walked slowly, humming to himself, testing snatches of verse. A bird's call might spark a rhyme. The rhythm of his footsteps might shape a tune. In this way, idleness gave birth to music. For without silence, there could be no song, and without pauses, there could be no performance. In the evenings, when he found lodging at an inn, the minstrel's pause took another form. After his voice had filled the room, after coin had been tossed, after applause had faded, he sat by the fire, alone in thought. The noise of others washed around him, yet he sat apart, strumming quietly, his notes barely rising above the crackle of flame. The crowd spoke loudly, but in his mind he drifted into silence, letting boredom cradle him like a slow tide. Sometimes, in those pauses, the minstrel shaped stories. He gathered fragments from villages, rumors of strange beasts, tales of miracles, whispers of fair of wars, and in his stillness, he stitched them into ballads. Boredom gave him time, and time gave him tales. What seemed idle was, in truth, creation hidden beneath a cloak of silence. In noble courts, pauses grew long indeed. A minstrel might be summoned to play, then left waiting in cold antechambers for hours, his lute across his knees, his stomach empty. Servants passed, guards yawned, but no call came, and so he waited, humming softly, counting stones upon the wall, staring into the candle's flame until it guttered low. Boredom pressed heavily, yet he endured, for the promise of patronage was worth the long stillness. When at last he was summoned, his voice rose with a depth born of waiting, his song richer for the silence that had come before. The minstrel's pause was not always gentle. Sometimes hunger gnawed, sometimes cold bit deep upon the road, when inns lay far apart. Then boredom grew sharper, edged with discomfort. Yet even in these moments, he found solace in his craft. He whispered verses into the night air, though none were there to hear. He tapped rhythms upon his knee, though no one clapped in return. In this way, he turned the idle hours into rehearsal, his boredom into art. In villages, his pauses were filled with children. They crowded round him, tugging at his sleeves, asking for tales of dragons and knights. Between songs, he indulged them, telling small fables, riddles, or jokes. Their laughter filled the silence, their wonder softened his weariness, and in their joy, he forgot his own boredom, carried for a time by their eager eyes. The seasons shaped his pauses as surely as they shaped his songs. In spring, he rested beneath blooming trees, their petals drifting onto his lute. In summer, he sought shade by rivers, his feet cooling in water while he plucked lazy notes. In autumn, he sat upon stone steps, watching leaves swirl while his mind wandered through half-made verses. In winter, he huddled close to hearths, his fingers stiff, his voice softer, yet still he waited, still he endured. Often, people thought the minstrel's life one of constant delight, of endless songs, of ceaseless company. But he knew the truth. that his life was stitched as much from silence as from sound. His pauses were long, his songs brief, his boredom was frequent, his applause fleeting. Yet within those pauses lay the heart of his art, for without stillness, his words could not ripen. Without waiting, his melodies could not take shape. And so, the minstrel came to see his pauses not as burdens, but as companions. They walked beside him as surely as his shadow. They taught him patience, observation, reflection. They taught him to listen, to gather, to dream. They taught him that boredom is never truly empty, but full of quiet seeds, waiting to grow into song. At last, when the minstrel lay down at night, his lute beside him, his cloak wrapped tight, his mind drifted upon those very pauses. He replayed the faces he had seen, the murmurs he had heard, the silences he had endured, and in his dreams, they all wove together, forming new ballads, new tales, new music. Thus the minstrel's pause, though quiet, though idle, was never wasted. It was the space between notes, the silence that made melody sweet. And in embracing it, the minstrel found peace. For in truth, all life is a song, and every song is made not only of sound, but of silence. And in silence, boredom is softened, and time becomes a gentle companion. The monastic hours beyond the villages and the towns, beyond the bustling markets and the wandering minstrels, there lay the quiet stone walls of monasteries. Within these walls, life was measured not by coin or harvest, not by song or feasting, but by the steady rhythm of prayer, work, and silence. The monks who lived within followed the hours of the day as though each were a sacred beat upon a rosary, touched gently, counted slowly, one after another. Yet even here, in places where devotion was deepest, there came upon the brothers long stretches of waiting, of stillness, of time that felt heavy in the hands. The monastic hours were filled with holy duty, but between those duties crept boredom, as it crept everywhere, even in cloisters meant for heaven. The bell was the keeper of time. At dawn it rang, calling the brothers from their straw pallets into the chill of morning prayer. Their voices rose in chant, echoing softly beneath vaulted stone. When the psalms ended, the monks dispersed, some to tend the garden, some to copy manuscripts, some to mend the roof or stir the great pot of porridge. But when tasks were light, when winter slowed the garden, when the quills dried or the ink froze in its pot, the hours lengthened. A monk sat with folded hands, waiting for the bell to ring again, and in that waiting, he felt the dullness of time. Some fought boredom with discipline. They recited verses silently, lips barely moving, fingers tracing the words upon the page. Others walked slowly through the cloister, their sandals tapping against stone, round and round the square courtyard, each step a prayer, each turn another circuit of patience. Still others stared at the flicker of candlelight, their thoughts drifting, their minds heavy with drowsiness. The monastic hours stretched longest in winter. Days were short, nights cold, yet the prayers remained many. After Compline, when the final office ended, sleep came, but only for a little while. For before dawn, the bell rang again, and the monks rose for vigils. Some stumbled through the darkness, their eyes heavy, their bodies weary. They knelt in the chilled chapel, chanting slowly, their voices wavering. Boredom sat among them, not unwelcome, but familiar, for the repetition was endless. The hours alike, and the silence deep. Yet boredom in the monastery was not barren. It was like soil lying fallow, waiting quietly, unseen, for seeds to grow. In those empty hours, a monk learned patience as others learned letters. He learned to sit with silence, to endure sameness, to find rhythm in monotony. What others might flee, the monk embraced, for in it lay a strange kind of peace. When the copying of manuscripts grew wearisome, when the words blurred and the quill scratched without joy, a monk would pause. He looked up at the high beams above, at the small square of light falling through the window. He let his mind wander, not to worldly things, but to the simple flow of breath, to the slow passing of clouds beyond the glass. That pause, that boredom, became a prayer of its own. In the gardens, too, boredom lingered, hoeing the same furrows, pulling the same weeds, carrying the same buckets of water. These tasks repeated endlessly, season after season. Yet in the sameness, the monk found a slow, steady rhythm. The soil gave little surprise, the weeds returned without end, and so time lost its sharpness. Boredom smoothed the edges of the hours, turning them into a gentle flow, like water over stone. The scriptorium, where books were copied, was perhaps the very heart of boredom. Long benches, narrow desks, the faint scratching of quills. This was the world of the copyist. A single letter required care, a single page required hours, a single book required years. The eyes strained, the fingers cramped, and always there was silence. Monks nodded in weariness, their minds wandering even as their hands worked. And yet, from this boredom, beauty was born. For in the slow hours of copying, in the long pauses, and repeated strokes, manuscripts were made, books of prayer, books of wisdom, books that outlasted the very hands that wrote them. The monastic hours were also shaped by fasting. Days without meat, days without milk, days without more than a little bread and ale. Hunger deepened boredom, making time crawl more slowly. Each moment stretched thin. Yet hunger too became part of devotion. part of the rhythm, part of the waiting. A monk learned not to hurry through the hours, but to let them pass like beads, one after another, however slowly. At times, monks sat together in the refectory, eating in silence while one read aloud from holy texts. For the listeners, boredom often pressed heavily. The reader's voice droned, steady, slow, unchanging. The words blurred, the meaning slipped away, the food grew cold. Yet even in this, the monks endured, their minds wandering in safe channels, half dreaming, half listening, letting the monotony lull them. And when all tasks were finished, when no book was left to copy, no weed left to pull, no roof left to mend, then came the longest hours of all. A monk sat upon a bench, hands folded in his lap, eyes upon nothing. He breathed, he waited, he let the hours pass. For the monastery was not a place of excitement, but of endurance, and boredom was its daily companion. But in that boredom lay a strange gift. Outside the monastery, men fled from silence, filling their days with noise, their nights with feasts, their time with distraction. Inside, the monks met boredom as one meets an old friend. They did not wrestle against it, but sat beside it. They let it teach them stillness, and in stillness, they found peace deeper than pleasure, rest stronger than revelry. Thus, the monastic hours measured by bells, filled with prayer, heavy with silence, became both a burden and a blessing. Boredom was their constant guest, but in embracing it, the monks learned to see it, not as emptiness, but as fullness. A fullness of patience, a fullness of quiet, a fullness of time unbroken. When night came at last, when the final bell rang, the monks lay down upon their straw pallets. They closed their eyes, their hands folded upon their chests, their minds softened by repetition. And in the darkness, boredom itself became a gentle lullaby, carrying them into dreams as steady as the tolling of the bell. The pilgrim's road. The pilgrim set out with staff in hand and satchel upon shoulder, the road stretching before him like a ribbon unrolling across the land. He walked toward holy places, toward shrines where relics gleamed and saints were said to intercede. But the journey itself was long, and most of it was silence, dust, and waiting. The pilgrim's road was not always filled with wonder. It was not lined with miracles or adventures at every turn. More often, it was filled with miles of sameness, stone after stone, tree after tree, the sound of sandals scuffing the earth. Boredom walked beside the pilgrim as faithfully as his shadow. At dawn, he rose when the cock crowed, gathering his meager belongings, fastening his cloak against the morning chill. The first steps of the day felt fresh, the air cool, the sky pale with new light. But as the hours stretched on, the pilgrim felt the weight of distance. Villages were far apart, shrines lay beyond hills, beyond valleys, beyond days of travel. And so, he walked, and walked, and walked again. To pass the time, the pilgrim prayed. At first his prayers were long, full of intention, full of words. But as the road lengthened, his prayers became shorter, repeating the same phrases again and again. Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, over and over, until the words lost their shape, until they were little more than the rhythm of his steps. In this way, prayer blurred into boredom, and boredom blurred into prayer, until the two became one. The pilgrim often met companions along the road, a farmer bound for market, a soldier returning from campaign, a widow traveling to see a relic said to heal. For a time, conversation softened the monotony. Stories were exchanged, laughter shared, meals divided, but soon enough, the road stretched again, and each traveler drifted at his own pace, leaving the pilgrim once more in solitude. Then came the silence, pressing long upon the hours. The land itself offered little surprise. Fields lay flat and wide, their furrows neat but unchanging. Forest paths wound endlessly between trees, their shadows cool, their undergrowth thick, but each mile resembled the one before. Hills rose and fell, like waves that never ended. The pilgrim's staff tapped upon stone, his feet raised small puffs of dust, and time itself seemed to stand still. Nights brought small relief. At inns the pilgrim found straw beds, crowded with others, their snores filling the dark. In barns, he slept beside oxen, their breath warm upon the air. On fair nights, he lay beneath the stars, his cloak drawn tight, the earth his pillow. Yet even in rest, boredom lingered, for the road did not change, and tomorrow was always another day of walking. The pilgrim's satchel grew lighter as the days passed. A crust of bread, a wedge of cheese, a flask of ale, these were his meals. Plain and repetitive. Hunger dulled his senses, slowed his steps, made the hours drag. Yet he endured, for the journey itself was an offering. Each step was penance, each mile a prayer, each weary hour a gift laid before the saints. There were moments of distraction. Sometimes a shrine stood by the roadside, a weathered cross, a small chapel, a carved figure of the Virgin. The pilgrim knelt, whispered a prayer, touched the stone. Then he arose and walked on, the moment already behind him, the monotony returning. Rain made the road heavy. Mud clung to his sandals, slowed his steps, soaked his cloak. The world narrowed to the sound of drops striking earth, to the rhythm of weary feet. In those hours, boredom became almost unbearable, yet there was nowhere to flee. The only choice was to walk on, step by step, through water and weariness. Sunshine, too, brought its own weariness. The pilgrim sweated beneath his cloak, the road shimmered with heat, and the horizon seemed to retreat with each step. Thirst grew sharp, lips cracked, skin burned. Time lengthened unbearably. Yet still, he walked, and the road did not end. At times, boredom gave way to strange dreams of waking. The pilgrim's eyes saw the road, but his mind wandered far away to childhood, 2 sins long past, 2 moments of joy or regret. The miles vanished beneath his feet unnoticed, his body moving by habit while his thoughts drifted into memory. In this way, boredom opened doors, leading him into places of the heart he had long forgotten. Sometimes he sang softly to himself, though his voice grew hoarse. Old hymns, travelers, songs, even fragments of chants the melodies faltered, the words faded, but still they gave a rhythm, a fragile company against the silence of the road. At way stations, where other pilgrims gathered, he heard their stories. Some spoke of visions, others of hardships, others of miracles they hoped to find. Each tale passed the hours for a little while, but when the fire burned low and the voices faded into sleep, the pilgrim once again faced the long road, and the long silence. Boredom on the pilgrim's road was not like boredom in a village, softened by hearth and neighbor. It was not like boredom in the monastery, filled with prayer and duty. It was a heavier boredom, born of endless steps, of sameness without end, and yet it carried its own gift. For in stripping away distraction, in emptying the hours of all but walking, the pilgrim came face to face with himself. The road tested not only the body, but the mind. It demanded patience deeper than comfort, endurance longer than desire, and in meeting that demand, the pilgrim found a quiet strength. Boredom became a teacher, showing him how to endure without complaint, how to accept without struggle, how to walk simply, step after step, without asking when the end would come. At last, after many days, the pilgrim saw the spire of a cathedral rising on the horizon. His heart stirred, his pace quickened, his weariness lifted. Yet he knew the truth, that the miracle was not only at the journey's end, but also in the journey itself. In the boredom endured, in the silence kept, in the patience practiced with each step upon the pilgrim's road, and when he knelt at the shrine, when he whispered his prayers before the relic, he carried with him not only the hope of blessing, but also the memory of long, slow days. For those days had carved patience into him as deeply as rivers carved valleys. And in that patience, he found peace. So it was that the pilgrim's road, though heavy with boredom, led not only to holy places, but also to a quiet holiness within. Each pause, each step, each weary hour became part of a greater journey, a path not only across the land, but across the soul. The castle watch high upon the hill, where the stone walls of the castle rose against the sky. There stood the watchtower. From its narrow windows, a man could see far across the fields, the forests, and the winding road below. It was here that the castle guards kept their long vigil, eyes turned outward, waiting for dangers that seldom came. The life of a watchman was not filled with battle, nor with glory. Most days passed in silence, broken only by the wind upon the ramparts or the call of a crow circling above. The castle watch was a task of patience, of endurance, of long hours stretched thin across the day and night. Boredom, more than sword or spear, was the true companion of the guard. At dawn, the changing of the watch brought men up the winding stair. Their boots clattered upon stone, their breath misting in the cool air. One group descended, weary from the night, while another took their place. The fresh guards leaned upon the battlements, blinking into the pale light, eyes adjusting to the horizon. The pattern repeated endlessly, day after day, season after season. From the tower, the world seemed still. The fields stretched wide and empty, dotted with sheep moving slowly, their bells faint in the distance. The forest stirred gently with wind, leaves rustling like whispers. The road wound across the land, sometimes carrying a rider, sometimes a cart, but more often empty. To watch such stillness hour after hour was to feel time slow almost to a halt. The watchman spoke little. Conversation passed the hours now and then, but silence soon returned, for there was little new to say. Each man had told his stories already, of hunting, of farming, of battles remembered or only imagined. After the words faded, the men leaned in stillness once more, their minds drifting, their eyes half closed against the sameness of the view. Sometimes, to drive away boredom, a guard counted. He counted stones in the wall, counted clouds drifting across the sky, counted sheep moving slowly below. Other times he traced the path of ants upon the battlements, or followed with his eyes the fluttering of a banner stirred by wind. Small things became great when hours stretched long. Meals broke the monotony. Though they were simple bread hard as stone, cheese crumbling, ale lukewarm, a guard chewed slowly, savoring each bite not for taste but for change, for something to mark the passing of time. When the food was gone, the silence returned, and the waiting resumed. Night watch was longest of all. The world outside grew dark, the fields vanishing into shadow, the forest melting into a single shape. Only the stars and the moon gave light, and their slow arc across the sky was the measure of time. The guard strained their ears for sounds: a wolf's howl, A branch snapping? A distant rider? More often, there was nothing. The silence pressed heavy, broken only by the shuffling of boots, the muffled cough of a weary man, or the sigh of wind through the arrow slits. In such hours, boredom grew sharp. The guards fought drowsiness, stamping their feet, pacing the wall, rubbing their eyes. They told one another small tales to stay awake, or sang softly, though their voices soon fell quiet. Some prayed, not with fervor but with repetition, whispering the same words again and again, until they became like a chant against sleep. The seasons shaped the watch as surely as the bell marked the hours. In summer, the sun lingered long, and the heat pressed down upon the men, their armor stifling, their throats dry. Flies buzzed ceaselessly, and sweat trickled slowly, making the hours feel endless. In winter, the cold bit fiercely, numbing fingers and stiffening joints. Breath hung in clouds, frost clung to stone, and still the guards remained, stamping feet against the chill, their boredom mingled with discomfort. At times, the watch brought sudden change. A rider appeared upon the horizon, galloping fast, cloak flying. A cart creaked toward the gate, piled high with goods. A group of peasants approached, seeking shelter within the walls. In such moments, the guards stirred, their voices sharp, their eyes alert. For a brief while, boredom lifted, but when the rider passed, when the cart entered, when the peasants were gone, stillness returned, heavier for the interruption. Sometimes, the guards found diversion in small crafts. A man carved a piece of wood with his dagger, shaping it slowly into a figure or a toy. Another mended his cloak with rough stitches, the needle glinting in the dim light. Another traced patterns upon the stone with chalk, idle drawings that rain would soon wash away. These small acts softened the hours, gave hands something to do, gave minds a brief rest from stillness. Yet the truest companion of the castle watch was thought. In silence, the guards drifted inward. They remembered harvests, feasts, lovers left behind, fields once tilled. They relived quarrels and regrets, imagined what might have been had life taken another turn. Some dreamed of battle and glory, others of quiet cottages and warm hearths. Boredom became a doorway, leading each man into the corridors of his own memory. And when the bell tolled at last, marking the end of a shift, the guards descended the stair with weary relief. Their legs ached, their eyes smarted, yet they carried with them not only weariness but also the strange calm that boredom brings. For though the hours had dragged, though the silence had weighed heavy, they had endured. The castle stood strong because of such endurance, not because of battles fought upon its walls, but because men stood watch through countless nights of nothing. The true defense of stone was patience. The true strength of towers was boredom born without complaint. Thus the castle watch, though long and weary, though filled with silence and sameness, was not wasted. It was the quiet thread that bound safety to those within, the unseen labor that kept the gates secure. And for the guards themselves, it was a teacher of patience, of endurance, of waiting without end. When at last they lay upon their pallets, when their eyes closed in sleep, the rhythm of the watch still lingered. They dreamed of walls, of fields, of skies unchanging. And in those dreams, boredom softened into peace, the long vigil becoming a lullaby. The merchant's stall in the heart of the town, where cobbled streets wound together, and voices mingled in a restless hum, there stood the marketplace. Stalls of wood and cloth leaned shoulder to shoulder, their tables piled with wares, bolts of wool, baskets of apples, jars of honey, knives glinting in the sun. Among these, the merchant took his place each day, arranging his goods with care, his eyes alert, his voice prepared. The market seemed lively to those who visited, colorful, noisy, full of movement. But for the merchant, who stood within it from dawn till dusk, the hours were long, and boredom walked beside him. For though the crowd surged past in waves, not every moment was filled with trade. Between the haggling and the coin, there was always waiting, always stillness, always long stretches of time with nothing to do but watch. At dawn, he spread his wares upon the table, cloth folded neatly, jars lined in rows, trinkets polished so they caught the light. His voice rose cheerfully at first, fine wool, sturdy knives, apples sweet as honey. But as the hours passed, his calls grew softer, his energy faded, and he leaned against the post of his stall, gazing across the square. The market filled and emptied with the hours. At first came peasants with baskets, selling eggs, onions, handfuls of herbs. Later came townsfolk seeking bread, salt, or wine. Then, in the afternoon, fewer buyers lingered, and the square grew quieter. This was the merchant's longest time. He stood, hands folded, eyes half dreaming, while flies buzzed lazily, and the sun cast long shadows across his table, to pass the hours. He arranged his wares again and again. A jar moved from one side to another, a cloth folded twice more, though it was already neat. His fingers smoothed the same corner, his eyes measured the same rows. Each gesture passed a few moments, but the stillness returned quickly. Heavy as ever, he watched the crowd, not with keen eyes, but with the dull gaze of one who has looked too long. He noticed faces without knowing them, gestures without meaning. A child tugged at his mother's sleeve, a beggar stretched out a hand, a dog sniffed at crumbs near a baker's stall. All these small scenes passed before him like a play repeated endlessly, until the merchant no longer cared for its story. Meals offered some change. At midday, he unwrapped a cloth bundle, taking out bread hard from yesterday, cheese sharp with age, perhaps a little fruit, if he had coin to spare. He ate slowly, chewing long, savoring the break in the sameness. When the food was gone, he brushed crumbs from his lap, sighed, and settled once more into waiting. The weather shaped his boredom as much as the trade. In summer, the sun burned upon the square, sweat trickling down his back, his mouth dry. In winter, he stamped his feet against the cold, breath rising in clouds, hands stiff upon the table. Rain darkened his stall, soaking cloth and dripping from the awning, while he pulled his cloak tighter and watched puddles spread across the stones. Each season added its own weight to the long hours. Each made boredom sharper in its own way. Sometimes a neighbor broke the silence. A fishmonger called a jest, a baker shared gossip, a tanner complained of taxes. Their words passed the time for a little while, but soon each returned to his own business, and the stillness crept back. The merchant leaned on his elbow, staring into nothing. The noise of the market washing around him like water around a stone. Children often wandered by, peering at his wares with wide eyes, reaching out until their mothers pulled them back. At times the merchant offered a small smile, or let a child hold a trinket before returning it. These moments brought flickers of life, but they faded quickly, leaving the long hours unchanged. Even trade itself was no cure. A buyer haggled, coins clinked, goods changed hands, but the moment ended swiftly. The stall grew quiet once more, and the merchant was left again with silence and waiting. For every moment of bustle there were many more of emptiness, each one stretching long to ease his mind. The merchant sometimes drifted into memory. He thought of journeys along the road, of wagons creaking under weight, of rivers crossed by ferry, of villages where he once sold his wares. He remembered faces of buyers long gone, voices half forgotten, markets in other towns that seemed brighter, though perhaps they were not. Memory softened the hours. Yet even memory could not fill them all. At other times, he dreamed forward, imagining a larger stall, a better trade, perhaps a shop with walls and roof where he need not shiver in winter or sweat in summer. He dreamed of coin enough to rest, of feasts, of a bed softer than straw. But dreams were fragile, and soon he opened his eyes to the same stall, the same goods, the same square, the same hours stretching still. Boredom in the marketplace was not sharp like hunger, nor heavy like labor. It was gentle, yet endless, like water dripping steadily upon stone. It wore at the merchant slowly, day after day, season after season, until he no longer noticed its weight. It became part of him, as natural as the table he leaned upon, as familiar as the goods he sold, and yet, within that boredom lay a certain peace. The world passed before him, in its endless pattern, peasants with baskets, nobles with purses, children with sticky fingers, beggars with open hands. He did not chase it, nor flee from it. He simply watched, hour after hour, until the hours themselves seemed less like burdens and more like companions. At dusk, when the market emptied, the merchant gathered his goods once more, folding cloth, packing jars, tying ropes. He carried his wares away, his body weary, not from toil but from waiting. Yet as he left the square, he felt the quiet calm of a day endured, a day past, a day the same as many before and many to come. The stall would stand again tomorrow. The same goods would lie upon its table, the same voices would rise in the square, the same hours would stretch long and silent, and the merchant would stand, as always, leaning upon his post, watching the world pass slowly before him. Thus the merchant's stall, though filled with boredom, was not empty. It was part of the great rhythm of life, steady and unchanging, a thread in the fabric of time. And in that steadiness, in that sameness, there was a quiet that could soften even the longest hours, carrying him gently into rest, as sure and steady as the turning of the seasons. The empty square when the bells of evening rang, and the last light of day stretched thin across the sky. The marketplace, so full of noise and motion in the bright hours, grew quiet. Shadows lengthened across the cobbled stones. The air, once alive with the calls of sellers and the chatter of buyers, softened into silence. Step by step, the square emptied, until little remained but the stillness of stone and the whisper of wind through narrow streets. Stalls stood like tired sentinels, their awnings sagging, their tables bare. Where jars and cloth and baskets once crowded, now only wooden planks and forgotten crumbs lay. The air smelled faintly of apples bruised in baskets, of spices spilled from careless hands, of smoke drifting from the baker's oven cooling at last. All around, shutters closed one by one, and candles flickered behind windows. As the town withdrew from the square and turned inward for the night, the emptiness itself seemed alive, carrying its own quiet weight. The cobbles, polished smooth by countless steps, now held only the sound of a stray boot or the clatter of a cartwheel, echoing far away. Each sound, once drowned in the market's chorus, now rang sharp and clear, hanging in the cool evening air. For those who lingered, boredom in the square took on a strange form. Without the bustle of trade, without the endless movement of faces and voices, time itself seemed to stop. A watchman leaning on his staff yawned, his eyes half closed as he shuffled along his path. A stray dog nosed through the shadows, tail wagging lazily as it sought scraps. An old woman, too poor to leave, sat against the wall, her eyes fixed on nothing, her body still as stone. Each of them was caught in the same waiting, the same stillness, the same hollow passing of hours. The square became a place between times no longer day, not yet night. It held the memory of the crowd, but only as an echo, faint and fading. The merchant's cries, the beggar's plea, the jester's laugh all seemed to linger in the stones, like faint voices beneath the hush. Yet the longer the silence stretched, the more those voices drifted, until only the quiet remained. In the center stood the fountain. Dry for many years, its basin cracked, its statue worn smooth by time. During the day, it was overlooked, just another piece of stone in a busy square. But at night, in the emptiness, it became a companion to those who waited. The watchman glanced at it as he passed. The dog curled near its base, the old woman rested her back against its cool surface. Even the fountain seemed bored in its own way, waiting endlessly for water that would never return. The lamps were few and far between. Their glow reached only partway across the cobbles, leaving wide spaces in shadow. Within those shadows, boredom deepened, for there was little to see, little to hear, little to do but breathe and wait. A passerby might pause and look upward at the stars, their slow shimmer offering a different sort of company. But even the stars moved too slowly to break the stillness of the square. Sometimes, a small noise broke the silence, a rat scurrying near the baker's stall, the creak of a shutter in the wind, the faint laughter of drinkers in a distant tavern. Each sound came and went quickly, swallowed by the quiet. The square remained as it was, broad, empty, waiting. Boredom here was not restless, nor heavy, but soft and vast, like a cloak spread over the stones. Those who lingered within it felt time blur. The hours were no longer counted by trade or talk or steps across the market, but by the slow drift of shadows, the dimming of the sky, the cooling of the air. One could sit in the square for what felt like moments, only to find that the night had grown deep. And yet, within this emptiness, lay a certain gentleness. The square, so often crowded and loud, now gave itself as a place of rest. The stones no longer echoed with clamor, but with stillness. The air no longer pressed with voices, but with silence. Even boredom, stretched long and quiet, seemed to soften into something like peace. The watchman, leaning once more against his staff, felt his eyes close a little. The old woman, weary and silent, let her thoughts drift without purpose, as though carried away by the hush. The stray dog curled tighter inside, tail twitching in sleep, and all around, the square seemed to breathe slowly, as though it too had grown drowsy in its own emptiness. Hours passed, though none marked them. The lamps burned low, the moon rose high, and still the square lay open, vast, and waiting. At last, even the smallest sounds faded, the cartwheels, the shutters, the voices far away. Nothing remained but the steady rhythm of silence, long and unbroken, until it seemed the square itself had fallen into slumber. Here, in this emptiness, the long boredom of the day found its end. The square, like all who passed through it, rested, and in that rest, time itself softened. The long hours melted, and all became still. So ended the day, so ended the waiting, so ended the story of boredom in the square. And as the town slept, as the stars wheeled slowly overhead, the empty stones of the market cradled their silence like a lullaby, carrying every soul, merchant, watchman, beggar, beast, into the same quiet rest. And so, dear listener, our long journey through the quiet hours of history draws to a close. We have walked among hearths and halls, sat in taverns and markets, and lingered in the empty square, seeing how people of long ago passed their idle time. May these stories of stillness guide you into your own gentle rest, where dreams flow like candlelight and time softens like a fading song. If these tales have comforted you, I invite you to remain with us. Subscribe to Go to Sleep Historian, where the past is told not with haste, but with calmness, woven softly for those who seek peace in the night. Until we meet again, may your dreams be gentle, your sleep deep, and your rest as timeless as the centuries we leave behind.